Thanks for tuning in for another episode of our series of CIRP's mental health webinars. Enjoy and let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
Welcome to our weekly mental health webinar. My name is Nicole and I am the Program Assistant for Construction Rehab. I'll be running this webinar in the background, so let me just point out a few things to orientate everyone. On the screen is a little orientation to this platform. On the left is what the platform looks like on a laptop, and on the right is what it looks like on a mobile device. The first thing to notice is that there is a chat. On the laptop, you can simply type and press enter, while on the mobile version, you have to first tap the chat button and then type. Tapping the chat button again will minimize the chat. The next thing to notice is the Ask a Question button. On the mobile version, you may have to scroll to the right to see the Ask a Question button, depending on how large your screen is. Click or tap on the button and you can type in and ask a question. Please remember that the questions, like the chat, is public, so anything you say will be available to everyone. Because the questions are public, once questions are asked, you can also upvote and downvote the questions you would like answered. I will be monitoring the Ask a Question section, so vote for the questions you want answered and I will present them to the presenters. Lastly, there is a poll button. If you click on the poll button, you can see that there are a few polls set up already. There may be a few more set up throughout the crowdcast. Please cast your votes during the webinar. Again, on the mobile devices, you may have to scroll to the right to find the polls button. Click or tap on the button and you can vote in the polls. Once you've voted, click or tap the polls button again to close the poll. That's all for now. The presenters will now take it away.
Thanks, Nicole. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Vicky Waldron. I'm the Executive Director of Construction Industry Rehab Plan. Construction Industry Rehab Plan is a mental health and substance use program that's available to all members of the BC Building Trades and CLRA. We provide assistance to members themselves and their family members as well. We do everything from residential treatment, one-to-one counselling, groups, industry training. So anything that's related to mental health and substance use, we provide for our members. So I'm very happy today to welcome our guest, Lee Loftus. Lee is the former president and former business manager, former president of the BC Building Trades and the former business manager for Insulators, now retired. But before we start chatting with Lee, what I would like to know is some of the things that we can do to help you. So if you look along the screen at the bottom, just send us your thoughts, send us comments on the chats on the side. There's an Ask a Question button, as Nicole was saying. Just pop us a question and we'll answer those for you. So now, as I said, I'm really happy to have Lee here with us today. Lee, I can't thank you enough for talking with us today and talking to us about your experience with anxiety. Can you tell me a little bit about this, about your experience of anxiety?
Well, thank you, Vicky, and good morning. Being the president of the building trades and a business manager of one of the trade unions, running at high levels of stress is something that I've managed in the past and in many different ways. But being at home has been very different, and being at home in the COVID nightmare, let's call it a nightmare because that's sort of how it makes me feel, to be very honest with you. I'm one of those at-risk individuals that have some health issues arising from me being an asbestos worker for all the years that I worked in and around the industry. So, you know, I'm a little more mindful, a little more careful of that. And I didn't quite realize the anxiety that was coming my way until I sort of started to take a look at some of the symptoms I was starting to experience. So, you know, I found myself entrenched in watching American TV. And I found myself watching all the news outlets in regards to what's taking place. I found myself online on all of my social media feeds, reading everything I could find about what was going on. And all that did was made me anxious.
Yeah.
where I first went into this situation, I was thinking that this is not a big deal. I shouldn't be worried about it. And within 8 or 10 days, I couldn't get my mind off of what was happening.
Mm.
So that, of course, I found myself doing things that I don't like doing. I found myself, again, entrenched in watching things, but I was putting other things off. I was not doing things that I was supposed to be doing. My whole focus was around what I needed to know and how much I needed to know today. So everything that I was required to do, I mean, whether it was getting up at a timely pace, whether it was getting into the shower, whether it was going out to do things in the yard, all of those things were being put off. Whether it was responding to an email or a text, I wasn't even doing that. So, and as well, I was getting irritated and angry with my partner. My wife, Shirley, was, she'd ask a simple question and I would bark. And I don't need to do that. And I know better. And I found myself doing that. And so I sort of reached out to a couple of my social media clips that said, hey, things are like that. And just reminding everybody that check your own mental health, check the own things that you're doing. You might be captured in stuff, some of the things that you're doing. And it was interesting because when I did that, a lot of people responded positively. So I sort of just put myself out there. It says, listen, I'm generally a grounded person. And if this is bothering me, it's probably bothering you. Make sure you're not doing these things. And if you are, talk to somebody. And if someone talks to you, take the time to listen and be understanding and be careful. So I had some good positive responses out there. So that's what's been happening in the last 3 weeks or so. And I know, Vicky, when I mentioned it to you last week, you said, hey, this is a great topic. And I'm glad I was able to share that. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think 100% it's helpful. I think one of the things that is so prevalent when people are struggling with mental health is the stigma that's attached to it, and people feel shame. And a lot of these things are, they can get trapped in them because they feel like, there's no one else going through this, it's just me. And I think as a man struggling with mental health is even more difficult sometimes. It can be the shame that men tend to feel is heavier and greater. So when somebody in a position that you have held, a person that's so well known within the industry, is able to talk about that, I personally think, and I know that it breaks down a ton of barriers. So I'm very grateful that you're talking about this, and B, that other people can have the opportunity to hear that actually most people struggle with this. Anxiety is one of the fastest growing mental health issues across the world. Sorry, I should say across Western societies. It's so prevalent. One in 2 people will struggle with anxiety. It's quite a high number. So to hear you talk about it, for me, is it's so incredibly valuable to have other people, especially men, here that there are other men that hold these high positions that are very well known, that actually everybody struggles with this. So I do appreciate that. I do have a question for you. Is this something, we've talked about COVID, and we know that COVID has certainly raised people's anxieties across the board. Everybody feels anxiety around what's going on. There's anxieties around livelihood, anxieties about health, fear of what's going to happen in the future, all of this. But if we look at this beyond COVID and just a bit more broadly, is this something you have struggled with for a long time, or is this very specific to COVID?
Interesting question. I should say no, I've never struggled with this, but that would be a lie. I've struggled with it for a long period of time. Being in a high pressure job, having to decide negotiations, having to make determinations around employment, having to deal with employers and government and all the rest of that. has always put me in a situation that I'm uncertain. And I'm uncertain of my skills and my ability to do those types of things. And some days, you just find yourself winging it. And that's not what you want people to think about decision makers. So, in the past, when I found myself in those situations, I had other coping mechanisms. I don't have those here at home today. Those in the past, I would use other people around me by posing questions and making them responsible. I would change the topic and move on to another topic and move on, and then having to come back. So anxiety is nothing new to me. And it's always something that you hide as a leader. It's always something you don't want people to think that you don't know what the next answer is, because often the people are coming to you for the answers. I found that over the years, it's best to develop answers collectively rather than trying to do that. So that was one of the other coping skills that I had, is I tried to include people around me to manage the issues, rather than it being exclusively mine.
So how did it impact you personally? So how did it make you feel as a person, as a man, as a leader, as a tradesperson within the industry, as a construction worker? We know that construction workers, there is this very rough and tough image that goes with being a construction worker.
I'm not sure how to answer that. How does that make you feel? I mean, listen, it offers uncertainty, and when you feel uncertain about your skills and what you do, you then mask it with other things. You hide it, and if you're hiding things, you're not being honest and you're not being open. So, it was a challenge. It didn't make me feel well at all. There's many nights that I went home and I didn't sleep. There's many nights I went home and didn't do the things I should have done. And that's because I was uncertain, uncomfortable with what I was dealing with, and with the responsibilities attached to that. Not that I didn't know the answer and the solution. It left me uncertain about my abilities.
So that uncertainty is a very common feature of anxiety as a construct. In fact, it's one of the core features. So with anxiety arises for people when there is this uncertainty, when there is this unknown, and there is a fear of the unknown. And we all go through it. We all fear something that we're not sure of, and there's a desire to try and control the outcome. And that's something that when you have anxiety, when I have anxiety, when you have anxiety, wanting to try and control that outcome. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to try and do this, this, and this, so that it controls some of this. And now I have an idea of what's going to be coming up or what's going to be happening. Now, those, as in terms of strategies, are fantastic in the short term, right? Because what we can't have is people with this overwhelming anxiety, which is actually crippling. For some people, anxiety can get so bad that it cripples them to inaction, complete inaction. It leaves them immobilized. It can have a huge detrimental effect on them. And so strategies of avoidance are great in the short term, but in the long term, they actually exacerbate anxiety. So what happens is, what actually makes sense to us in the moment, for example, I can say that in doing these webinars, there's been anxiety from my end that is everything going to go live? So we do practice runs. We're trying to control the situation, make sure that it's controlled, because it gives us a level of comfort, which is great for the short term. But in the long term, one of the things that we recommend as therapists, as clinicians, is that you actually have to go through that unknown, which is very, very difficult to do. But the more you go through the unknown, the less your anxiety becomes over time. So anxiety is like a snowball. it never, if you look back, if anyone that's ever had anxiety, if you look back over your life and look at when it first started, it never ever stays the same. Anxiety never goes through life where it's just at that level. It will start here and it always increases. It always increases because what it relies on anybody to do or a person to do is to control outcomes. In order to manage anxiety, you must control outcomes so that you know, you take away the uncertainty, so everything becomes unknown to you. So the more you do that, the more you have to continually do that, because there's an infinite amount of possibilities in the world, right? We just can't factor for every single scenario that may possibly happen. And so in reality, when we try and control anxiety, again, I can't downplay or underemphasize or overemphasize the fact that short-term strategies are important. So to get you through that minute, they're important. But when we're looking at anxiety long-term, avoidance is something we don't recommend you do. We actually encourage our clients to feel a little bit of distress, not a lot, just a little bit of uncomfortableness, so they go through that unknown.
So Vicky, and I think in our conversation earlier this week, or it was late last week, where I said that at least I'm recognizing the symptoms. I recognize the anxious feelings. I recognize the obsessive watching. I recognize the procrastination. And with me doing that, I've been able to manage it, because that's what I was doing, was managing it. But I still left myself exposed to it. I still watch the local news. I don't watch President Trump and his ranting and stupid stuff, because that makes me really anxious.
Lee, you've got political. That's so not like you.
Yeah, no, I know. I know. So, I mean, is that the way to cope with this, or is that still avoidance?
So, I think I would say that's actually healthy, because there's a certain amount, if something is actually controllable, right? So I'm anxious what I might hear on the news, but if you turn the TV off, you're not going to hear it. That is 100% controllable, then absolutely. But there's other unknowns. So when there are things that you cannot control 100%, then we don't recommend you try and control them, because there's such a large amount of different outcomes that can happen. So for simple things like, you know, I think you absolutely did the right thing there. So if you are so what you're doing is very normal. You're seeking out information to help reduce your anxiety, right? So it's because remember, anxiety feeds on the unknown. It feeds on it. It needs it to kind of settle itself in the immediate, but it also needs it to keep going as in the background as anxiety in and of itself. So it serves two purposes. Resolving that unknown helps in the immediate, so you immediately feel, but in the background, it increases anxiety because you don't know what happened. But ultimately, in order to get rid of anxiety, you do have to keep going through that unknown. You just have to live with the unknown. And that is what helps reduce those overall in the long term, how breaks down that pervasive anxiety that we see. But in answer to your question, I think absolutely that was the right thing to do, because if it's really giving you high anxiety, listening to the news constantly, switching it off brings that anxiety down, and you would have felt that as well, I should imagine, where it kind of came down and you felt calmer.
I feel better today. I'm just still scared to go shopping, you know, and
Yeah.
I shouldn't be scared. I understand that those safeguards are in place, and that's my next task. I'm uncomfortable when I'm out in public. Fantastic.
And you know, obviously taking precautions and sticking to the guidelines, but I think that's kind of because what happens is we expect the worst to happen with anxiety, but when you actually take those first initial steps out and you go out and then you come back, one of the most important things to do is to evaluate your experience. before we go, we fear the worst, which is why we have anxiety. But when you venture out and come home again and the worst didn't happen, then it's important to kind of remind yourself of that. And so we always encourage our clients, when you go through the unknown, so in this case, venturing out, doing your shopping and coming home, to evaluate it with yourself. So you stop and say, okay, so how did that go? How different was that to what I thought it would be? Was it better, about the same, or worse? So you evaluate that. And often with anxiety, many times clients will evaluate that and say, actually, it was better than I thought it was going to be. And it's those kind of mental exercises that can help bring anxiety down. That self-evaluation piece afterwards is super important. That is what helps to start breaking down anxiety and anxiety thoughts.
So
well,
Vicky,
that's helpful.
if I could just interrupt here.
Yep.
We do have a couple of questions from the audience.
Okay.
So before we run out of time, I think it would be a good idea to address them.
Absolutely.
So the first one I have has to do with all the emotions that we were talking about, and goes back to what Lee was talking about in the beginning, about all of these emotions at the surface. So we have a question that says, I think I'm doing fine and not overly worried. But my emotions are so close to the surface, all of them happy, angry, sad, irritated. I don't want to appear to be overreacting to my coworkers, but I'm afraid I might.
Okay. I think that's again a very common thing. That's the first thing I will say to you, is when we are worried, anxious, especially when there are times like COVID when there is a lot of uncertainty out there. Our emotions, when we're busy and in normal times, we do a really good job of keeping our emotions down here. But when a crisis hits, what happens is all those emotions are sitting here and they're very much at the surface. Now, one of the things I tell everybody, and one of the things we know in our research and our training, is that as human beings, we are not supposed to hold our emotions. It's not something we're supposed to do. We are supposed to feel the emotions, and we're actually supposed to expel those emotions. So whatever we feel, we're meant to process that and push it out. We're not meant to hold it. And in fact, holding our emotions causes a lot of illness, causes mental health issues, and causes disruption. Now, that's all well and good, but you can't be going around work and, you know, screaming at people or telling people or crying. That's not what we can do in a professional setting. So what we tend to do, what people usually do, is say, well, I can't do that, so I'll just push it back down. The problem with pushing down is it will come back up. So what I would recommend in that situation is you've got to find a way to discharge those emotions in a safe way that isn't at work. So one way that's very helpful, and actually this works particularly well for men. We don't really know why. The research has looked at this and we don't know why, but we do know that it works particularly well for men. And this is keeping a journal. And so this is a way of getting what's in here out onto paper. And so you just free thought your thoughts down and you write about what's going on for you. And then you read that back to yourself. There's a lot of value in actually reading that back to a third person, but you may not have that person that you can do that with. If you haven't, it's still valuable to write it down. If you have a third person that you can actually read that back to, there's even more, there's a greater effect, there's greater benefits in doing that. So that can be a technique you can use to, when you are feeling the emotions and they're all up here, just take them, write them down on a bit of paper and put them out and put them down on paper, and that can help discharge some of those emotions. And of course, we always say calling a mental health professional and being able to talk to somebody. If anybody listening doesn't have the access to services such as CIRP, where we provide this unlimited counselling, what I would recommend is employee and family assistance programs. Those counselling sessions are very useful for this kind of stuff where you can do short-term work. They're not really designed for long-term trauma counselling, but definitely for short-term work, such as helping you get through this crisis. Absolutely, that would be a good thing to do.
Thank you so much, Vicky. I have a question for Lee here. Leaders and managers in our construction businesses often feel a great commitment to their employees' welfare. How can one hold them up in these anxious times?
Geez, great question. I think what it is to hold them up at this time is to make sure that they reinforce what they're doing is positive, and to make sure you're available to listen And make sure you're not that person standing in the front of the room lecturing and telling, but asking. So I think that that's the best way to reinforce it at time of stress, is to be asking, not telling, to be listening, and making sure that you comment on positive things in front of everybody, and that just lifts everybody. That's the way I've done it over the years.
That sounds really good. Some other questions we have here. I find anxiety rises when I make a list of what needs doing and put it into my guidance system and feeling overwhelmed. What can we do to help?
I can see Lee nodding. And so this is a very common strategy that people that have high anxiety, they will do this because, again, what we're trying to do is control the outcome. So if I write a list, I can control the outcome. So what this does is the action of writing a list makes people go, makes them feel a bit better. So, but then once you've written the list, the anxiety goes whoosh, because now, oh my gosh, look at everything I've got to do. And so that can be very anxiety provoking. So it's a double-edged sword. It helps the initial anxiety come down, because as you're writing it, Lee, I don't know if you can speak to that. You'll find that kind of whoof moment when you write it down. But then again, once you see how much it needs to be done, it goes right back up again. I don't know if that's something you relate to.
Well, hey, listen, I've got lists that haven't been done since 10 years ago, but I don't do lists anymore. I manage the issues at the time, and I think that that's the best way to do it. But I agree, there are times to write things down that make you feel better. Be careful, though.
Yes, absolutely. So what I always say with people that use this strategy, and there's a lot of people that use this strategy that have high anxiety. So here's what I do is I say your list needs to be a bit more in depth than just a list from 1 to 10. What you need to do is a list that says 5-minute jobs, mid-term jobs, long-term jobs, and that's what I recommend. And then when you do your list, you plug things in. So what that means is you're categorizing. You're actually saying, well, that long-term job is something I don't need to deal with immediately, but it's on my list. I need to deal with it, but it's very low priority. I can do that in a week's time. I can even do it in a month's time. Then there's the 5-minute jobs, what I call the 5-minute jobs. These are the whatever, got to fill my prescription, got to take the dog to the vets, whatever it is, something that's immediate. So you populate that list. So what that means is, whereas you had a list that was 10 items long, you've reduced the immediate ones that you need to focus on down to 2 or 3 items versus everything that's on that list. So lists can definitely help you, but I strongly recommend you don't do them as one long list. You break them up into quick tasks, medium tasks, long-term tasks. Hopefully that should help a bit as well.
Perfect, Vicky. That's great advice. And I have one last question before we end. When we know all the healthy strategies like walking, meditating, eating healthy food, etc., why do we resist doing them?
So I'm going to ask Lee, because I know we're running out of time, but I'm going to ask Lee to give his perspective quickly in a very quick answer. Then I'll give you the therapist perspective.
Well, I don't know if I have a quick answer, but I mean, procrastination is a fabulous thing, right? And you keep putting things off because you don't want to get it done, or you don't have the motivation. And I don't know what drives that. That's one of my challenges, is to get past my procrastination. And I think that's where we started this conversation, Vicky, is, what am I going to do about this procrastination? So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, so procrastination is a key feature of anxiety. It's crippling, right? So when people have anxiety, you procrastinate because so what people with anxiety tend to do is they will put it off, and then they'll make an impulsive decision. And that's generally how the pattern works. Because having a thought out, planned out decision, again, in and of itself raises anxiety. So what people will do is procrastinate, and then when the deadline is right here, then they'll just make a decision because it's an impulsive decision and they haven't had to plan it out, think it out, and it really decreases. So when we talk about things such as exercising, there can be many reasons why someone with anxiety isn't actually moving towards those things that they know is helpful. One of them may be that anxiety, whilst a separate construct from depression, it does go hand in hand. So that means that there might be some depressive symptoms going on. So we have to figure out what it is. It could be that actually there's some health belief fallacies going on. So there could be psychological reasons going on. So without actually kind of digging in, I wouldn't want to say this is why someone's not doing it, because it varies for everybody. What I will say, it can be a motivational driver that's driven through psychology, and we need to explore that. It could be there's some biological stuff going on, so it could be depressive symptoms going on. There could be some underlying belief structures that are maladaptive. So, but when you find that that's happening, what my recommendation would be to connect with a mental health professional who can actually dig through some of that and help kind of categorize where this lack of drive is coming from, and then help to change that for you.
Great, Vicky, that's great. All right, so I'm very conscious of the time here, so I'm going to thank Lee and Vicky for having this conversation with us. I'm also going to remind everyone to vote in the polls before we end this webinar. And you can see at the bottom of your page now, you should have a link that says check the Facebook event for more information. So if you click that link, you'll be redirected to our Facebook page where you can find more information and resources from our talk today. So thank you again, everyone, for coming, and join us again next Thursday at 10 a.m. for another conversation about mental health.
See you next week.
Well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Lee.
If you liked our video and you want to see more like it, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel.